Hi, everybody. I'm going to read you the story High-jinx Shoot-out by Guy Martin. It was published in the New Yorker magazine in June of 2009. I'm going to pause at certain points while I read this out loud to you because there's certain things about the story that you might not be familiar with. For example, the story takes place in New York, and in New York, they have different names for different parts of their neighborhoods. Like they'll use terms like brownstone, which basically means like a house that has brown stones in the front. But so as I read along, I'm going to go ahead and explain those to you throughout the reading. You should have a copy of the story out in front of you on your Chromebook. You should be following along. You certainly could be highlighting if you choose as I read this to you. That's great. If not, I hope you have something to write with and maybe something that you can jot down your thinking on the side as I read this story to you. You can play this as many times as you need to until you understand this story. And also, what I want you to know is that this is your very first source for your research. You will be writing an argument paper, and this will be one of the sources that you will include as part of that research and part of that argument. Okay? So, without further ado, High-jinx Shoot-out by Guy Martin. Inside the world of a killer high school assassination game. Killer, the last man standing game of water pistol ambush, has become a key end of the year ritual in several New York City high schools. At St. Anne's, a private school in Brooklyn Heights, the game lasts 2.5 weeks and is especially ferocious. Over the years, students there have developed a 17-point rule book, a map of the safe zones around the school, an entry fee, which is currently $20 per team, and it goes into the winner's pot, and a non-playing senior class judge to arbitrate disputed kills and rules violations. The judge also makes a pie chart of death, which is the order of killing assignments, which he or she then distributes out to squads shortly before opening day. I'm looking for some good massacres early this year's judge said, as the competition began the second week in May, summoning what his classmates referred to as his inner lawyer. He asked that his name not be used. I've arranged at least one boyfriend-girlfriend kill that could be interesting. Initially, each team of up to 4 students is given only the identities of its immediate prey. All other players are anonymous, so that in the days leading up to this game in the school becomes a souk of intelligence gathering and disinformation. I'm going to pause right there. A souk, the word S-O-U-K, is kind of like an underground black market of information. So basically, what the text is saying is that in the days leading up to the actual water fight, they share intelligence and they, share gossip of what they think is going on. And usually it's intelligence, but it's also sometimes disinformation. Moving forward. In 2007, Jake Protel, a freshman, distinguished himself by ferreting out the itinerary of a field trip that 2 targets were taking to Tel Aviv. Protel took a car to Newark Airport, found the victims before they passed through security, and dispatched them using 2 bathtub squirtfish. I had to get special permission from the judge for the squirtfish because I didn't want to take my gun anywhere near an El Al counter. Protel, now a junior, recalled as he paced Piermont Street with 3 water guns shoved inside his pocket of a hoodie. I'm going to pause here because what I want you to visualize as you're hearing this paragraph is that this is a student who basically, while playing the game, it's a squirt gun game, and they're supposed to run around all over town, and they're shooting each other with squirt guns. And if you think about this, he was going to take a squirt gun into an airport. Now, If you can imagine the current climate of safety and precautions and things that happen in an airport, you would realize that if this kid would have taken a squirt gun even anywhere near the security counter of an airport, he probably would have gotten detained. He might have even gone through some interrogation procedures, and he could have even been labeled as a potential terrorist. So this is not something that you want to giggle about. This is something you want to say, holy cow, these kids are serious. He ended up actually getting the two kids with bathtub squirt fish. So imagine back to when you were a tiny little bugga bugga in the bathtub and your mom and dad would buy you these water toys, things to play with while you're in the water getting washed. It was a bathtub squirt fish that he used instead of a gun. So if you go back to the quote, where he said, I had to get special permission from the judge for the squirt fish because I didn't want to take my gun anywhere near the El Al counter. The El Al counter is the security counter in order to get over to the airplane that would have taken those students to Tel Aviv. What you also want to notice is that these two students, who might have been part of playing the game, were on their way to another country. They probably thought they were safe. They weren't, and he was able to get them out before they left for the country. Back to the story. 18 squads of assassins signed up for Killer 2009, a total of 27 players, creating a pot of $360. The first week kicked off with the upperclassmen's swift massacre of the less disciplined freshman teams. There were a couple of tenacious ninth grade holdouts, though. Willis Cohen, age 15, just 5 feet 6 and 130 pounds, was gumming up the works for a team of seniors assigned to kill him. Since the start of the game, the 12th graders had been sleeping on futons in a couple of vans borrowed from their parents, the better to pull off a stoop-side ambush and avoid being ambushed themselves. They had to take Cohen out before they could move on to their next victims. At 10:30 p.m. on a Wednesday, 3 of the 4 seniors, armed with Walgreen-issued water pistols, staked out Cohen's house in a blue Toyota minivan. The idea was to use a cell phone to call the Cohen's landline, posing as Cohen's teammate Dominic, using Dominic's caller ID. The call had been engineered from a remote computer by a squad member with prodigious hacking skills. We want to get Cohen out on the stoop, or learn whether he's even sleeping at home, Tut Gaisford, the senior's driver, said. The call went through, but Cohen's mom, who had earlier driven her son and a teammate to a kill in Soho, had been tipped off. The brownstone remained dark, and the seniors spent the night on the cul-de-sac in the Heights. I'm going to pause here because the last 3 paragraphs talk about how extreme the game gets for these kids. You have a group of seniors borrowing minivans from their parents and sleeping in them overnight to stalk out a student so that they could shoot him with their water pistols. Sounds pretty extreme, doesn't it? Maybe even a little dangerous. I would assume maybe that this area of New York probably isn't an aggressively violent place, or else I don't think these parents would ever allow their kids to sleep outside in vehicles. So I'm going to assume it's a little bit of maybe a more wealthy neighborhood based on what I'm reading. But I also want you to pay attention to a couple terms. The word stoop means porch. So essentially, they wanted to get him out on the porch so that they could shoot him. Okay. Also, another term I want you to notice is the word brownstone. The brownstone remained dark. That's basically just his house. A brownstone is a type of architecture in New York. It's a house. They're row houses all built together. You can Google it. They're actually really pretty. And basically, they're called brownstones because the front part of the house, the facade, is made of brownstones. They're also very expensive, and you have to be making pretty good money in order to be able to afford to live in one of those in the city of New York. They also mention in these 3 paragraphs a couple of areas that I want you to be aware of. Soho is a borough of New York. So think of it maybe like Maryland Heights versus Chesterfield versus Ladue. Those are all areas, or we could even call them boroughs of where people live. Same thing in New York, okay? They call them boroughs, and that's just the areas where the kids would drive in order for them to get to what they needed for the people that they were working on. Okay, back to the story. Meanwhile, Jake Protel and his squad, Polly Lowther, Charlotte Estelle, and Mark Croatoro, mowed through entire teams, racking up 13 kills in 4 days. In 5 hours on Memorial Day, Lowther, a member of the winning teams from 2007 and 2008, shot a boy sitting on his stoop in Bowerham Hill, a second as he ventured from his country house to Cobble Hill, and a third who he had duped into coming to a party in the village. Remember, the word duped means tricked. Willis Cohen was finally killed through no fault of his own. He woke up and, as usual, hopped a neighbor's fence and exited through a neighbor's house. He caught a livery cab on Amity Street and headed north to the Heights. He knew he was in trouble when his driver refused to raise the windows. A member of the Gaysford team shot him in the chest through the cab's passenger side window as he pulled up to the school. Quote, "I told the driver to pull over on the other side of the street, but he wouldn't do it," Cohen said, the wet splotch drying in the center of his t-shirt. In the end, the Protal-Lothar team won with 21 kills, and they celebrated with a spaghetti dinner. In the late innings of killer season, some kids occasionally sleep in the deeper recesses of St. Anne's itself. The game's valedictory message is built into its architecture. School is the safe ground. And keen as the graduating seniors may be to leave, the game tells them that the world outside is not. Okay, I'm going to back up for just a second because I want you to notice just still some of that terminology. A livery cab, that's a yellow cab. So the guy was taking a yellow cab to get to school, and apparently one of the members of the opposing team had bribed the cab driver to keep the windows down so they could shoot the kid. Okay. They celebrated their win with a spaghetti dinner, and they used all the money that they had gathered from the pot of people who had played in order to pay for it. Basically, one other thing I want you to notice is that in the late innings, remember this game lasts 2.5 weeks over the course of the senior year when they celebrate it. Kids literally sleep in the school in the basement. Could you imagine sleeping in the basement at Central Middle or at Central High? If that's the only place you feel safe is the basement of school, you're not coming home. You might not be showering. You might not even be eating or eating well. And it's interesting that kids would go to such an extreme for such a game. Now, mind you that the game is played with squirt guns, so that makes it kind of exciting, I suppose. But I want you to also keep in mind that it's still pretty graphic, and it's still pretty extreme in the sense of what these kids are doing. Notice back around towards the end when Polly, I think it was his name, no, Willis. Willin was finally killed. He woke up and went through the neighbor's house in order to leave. So the neighborhood's in on it. The families are participating. The kids are all involved. They're sleeping in cars. They're sleeping at the school. And this is an example of a tradition, right? And I want you to kind of just leave it there. And then I want you to go back to the slide set where we can talk about how can we use this research and source in our own writing. So go there now.